Hello and welcome to my channel. This is the drawing that I'm going to be showing you today. I haven't done that many drawings of birds, and I've already done a drawing of an eagle. This was also done in charcoal like the previous one. I'm going to put the link to the old one in the description. And now let's have a look at the drawing process. The size of the paper is about 9 times 12 inches. As usual, I'm doing a sketch with a graphite pencil. I've placed the eagle's head slightly more to the right. The previous drawing was a drawing of the full body of an eagle in flight. This time I wanted to focus more on the head and the eyes and the beak. And I also wanted to draw a little bit less of the feathers because I don't really enjoy drawing the feathers, but sometimes it's a good idea to push yourself a little bit and to draw something that you're not really comfortable with. So there's going to be a bit of feathers here, and as you can see, I'm using my charcoal pencil to draw some suggestions of feathers here and there, but I'm going to go into more detail a little bit later. One of the first things I did when I had the sketch was I started shading the background because I wanted a fairly dark background so that the light side of the eagle would stand out against the background in contrast. And for the background I used a combination of vine charcoal and charcoal powder from my charcoal pencils. And I'm going to do the same thing with the eagle's body. So I just made some suggestions of these feathers just to give myself a rough idea where the neck ends and where the rest of the body begins. But I'm not really going to draw too many details in this phase. Right now, as you can see, I'm mostly trying to block in larger areas of darker value, because once I do these, it's going to be easier for me to start working on the details. For this purpose, I'm mostly using charcoal powder, which I'm spreading with my finger, and the charcoal powder I simply created by sharpening my pencils. By the way, the pencils that I'm using are woodless charcoal pencils. You can use any brand, but I prefer woodless charcoal pencils because they're a little bit easier to sharpen. And normally I use two grades, a soft one and a medium one. I use the medium one for most of the drawing process, and I use the soft one for some of the darkest bits on the drawing. So here I started drawing a little bit around the eye, and in my reference photo there was a little bit of a reflection there, but I wanted to make it even stronger. I made it even lighter than it was because I really wanted that reflection to stand out so that I could, I guess, put more life into those eyes. And there's also a very dark area here around the beak. Now for blending, as you can see, for these larger areas I mostly use my fingers, just the fingers, because it's a very quick way of covering large areas, and it's a good way of covering large areas when you don't have to worry about details too much. But when I start working on smaller areas, I usually blend with tools that can give you a little bit more accuracy and precision, such as tortillons, as you can see. So here I'm drawing the beak, and again I'm using a combination of a charcoal pencil for the details and a tortillon with a nice tip to blend those in. So the eye looks a little bit too large now because this area around the eye looks like the white of the eye, but that's going to be covered with some more charcoal, and it's going to make sense a little bit later once I shade it, or once I shade all of it. But the thing is that, as you can see, I'm doing a lot more of the background in this phase because the light is going to be coming from the right and above. So that side of the eagle is going to be a lot lighter, so I need to shade the background so that the light side of the eagle would stand out. So it's all about creating those nice contrasts so that the main subject would stand out. And I'm continuing to block in larger areas of darker value because If I started working on the feathers first, I mean, it would be impossible for me to, well, it wouldn't be impossible, it would be extremely tedious for me to try to control the amount of value in each individual feather. This way it's a lot easier to cover most of the body with the appropriate amount of value, keeping in mind that my light source is coming from above and from the right mostly, or more from the right than from the left, but it's mostly coming from above. And and once you do that, it's easier to put in the details later. So right now you can see that I'm starting to work around these feathers a little bit and around the wings. The wings also need to stand out against the rest of the body, which is why I'm shading the body next to the wing a little bit darker with a little more value. And also the edge on the background, the edge between the background and the eagle needs to be fairly clean. You don't want to create that halo glowing effect. I want to make sure that I clean up that edge so that the subject really stands out against the background. And you can see that here, because I felt like this area was already dark enough, I started drawing these individual feathers, and they are kind of stacked on top of one another. That's one of the things that makes them a little bit difficult to draw, because you have to try to understand the way in which they are stacked, and the way in which they kind of overlap, so that you can make that look realistic. And another thing that I have to do is shade in between them, so that the part of the feather which is sticking out the most is the lightest, and the part of the feather which is tucked in under the other feathers is darker. So you need to keep that in mind as you're shading individual feathers. And yes, you have to shade almost all of these individual feathers because otherwise they will look kind of flat and they won't look very realistic. Now, in the same way that I'm doing the shading with a pencil, I can do the same thing with an eraser. And by the way, this is an eraser that I'm using right now. This is not a white pencil that some people ask me, what kind of white pencil are you using? This is not a white pencil, it's just a eraser. It's a rubber eraser, but it's in a form of a pencil, and it can be sharpened. It's kind of like a Tombow Mono Zero eraser, but a little bit thicker, I guess. And this is a Kohinoor Hardmat pencil eraser. And I'm using it in the same way that I would use a pencil. Basically, I'm drawing the lines, except this time I'm drawing the lines by erasing, and I'm drawing white lines or lighter lines. So one of the neat things, and by the way, right now I'm shading in between the feathers, again trying to give them a little more depth and volume. So one of the things that you can do with an eraser is that you can actually control how dark or how light the mark will be. So you can make these lines that you erase lighter or darker, which is a very good thing. It's kind of like shading with a pencil, because with a pencil you normally control the amount of pressure or the amount of charcoal you put down, and you can do the same thing with a pencil eraser, because you can press harder and erase a little bit more, or you can press a little more gently and erase a little bit less. Also, when the pencil eraser gets dirty, it tends to leave marks which are not quite as white. So you can use that to your advantage, and then when you want lighter marks, then you just resharpen your pencil and clean it up, and you create stronger highlights. So these are just some of the things that you need to keep in mind so that you can get the most out of your tools. Both when you're working with a pencil and when you're working with an eraser. And when you have a complex subject such as this one, where you have a lot of these highlights, you have to do a lot of negative drawing, and you have to do a lot of erasing to create these details. And that's why it's a good idea to understand what you can do with your pencil eraser. Now, if you're asking me whether you can use something other than a pencil eraser, the answer is of course yes. You could also use even a regular eraser, but it would be a lot more difficult to get these thin lines. And another thing that you could use naturally is the kneaded eraser, which maybe in some ways would be even better, but the pencil eraser I feel is a lot more convenient because it allows you to draw in the same way that you draw holding a pencil. Anyway, as you can see, I've done a lot more detail on the eye and around the eye, and now the eye looks a lot more realistic. And now you can see how nicely that highlight stands out because I shaded everything around it. And that's kind of what I wanted, because like I said in my reference photo, the highlight was kind of subdued. It was in the shadow, and I wanted to really amplify that to put a little more life into that eye, so I made that highlight even stronger, even lighter, and created even more contrast. And here you can see I'm moving on to the neck, and there's going to be a lot of smaller feathers here. But first I need to make this area darker so that the neck would stand out. And the thing is that I did the same thing with the neck that I did with the rest of the body. So first I shaded the larger areas, and then I moved in with the details. And you can see that I'm drawing these shadow areas in between the feathers. So first I'm drawing these darker areas, just creating some suggestions where the feathers are overlapping, and in those areas where they are overlapping, those are the darkest areas. And then I'm going to move back in with a pencil eraser, and I'm going to draw the highlights on the tops of or rather the tips of those feathers, and make those a lot lighter. And the feathers closer to the beak are really, really small, so that they almost look like fur or something. So they're really a lot smaller, so I have to keep my strokes thinner and shorter there. And I'm just softening some of these lines a little bit with tortillon. And now I'm back to using a pencil eraser, and I'm erasing the tips of those feathers in order to really make them stand out. So I think you can see now what it was that I was trying to accomplish, because I first shaded in the darker areas, and I already had my midtone established because I blocked in the larger areas. And now I'm doing the lightest areas just by erasing some of the value from these tips, and that creates an illusion like these individual feathers kind of stand out and are stacked on top of the others. So it's all about creating an illusion of depth and volume in the feathers, and it's very similar to drawing fur in animals or hair in human portraits. Because when you're drawing hair in human portraits, you don't want to make it look flat or even value. What you want to do is try to give it some depth by trying to make it look like some segments of that hair are sitting on top of the others and stuff like that. So I think I achieved a nice amount of detail on both the wings and the body and the neck. And I think I have a nice range of value from the darker areas to the lighter areas. The only part of the it's not super detailed. I think I kind of simplified some things because, like I said, I don't really enjoy drawing feathers, and it's not going to be a super realistic drawing. Obviously, some wildlife artists have a way of making this look even more realistic. But the only part that's very realistic, where I put in a little more effort, is the head, and I'm still going to do a lot more work around the beak and the eyes and stuff like that. But so far I'm pretty happy with the level of details on the rest of the body, and I don't think I'm going to be making it a lot more detailed than this. In this phase I'm just mostly going to be refining the highlights and adding in some details, and maybe cleaning up the edges between the main subject and the background, because that's very important for me, because the background needs to be slightly darker, and I need to do the rest of the background here at the bottom. I need to cover all of it, but also I need to make sure that the part of the background here around the beak is a little bit lighter, maybe, so that the beak would stand out, or at least the darkest part, the tip of the beak, would stand out. And I deliberately put a little bit more of the darker value next to those lighter areas on the eagle, so that I would enhance that contrast. And I'm also using a soft charcoal pencil here and there sparingly, just to go in and add some touches of very, very dark value here and there. So like I said, it's mostly medium charcoal pencil, but here and there I just use a touch of soft charcoal pencil just to add some very dark bits to enhance that range of value. Because the bigger the range of value, the more volume and depth you will be able to achieve in your subject. And of course, the less flat it will all appear, because I don't want it to look flat. I want some depth in my drawing. The background is kind of dark. I just wanted the main subject to stand out. You can just leave it to the imagination what it is. Maybe it's some kind of murky sky, maybe it's a mountain or something. It doesn't really matter. I don't want anything particularly defined in there. I'm just going to make a nice smooth background with some variation in the value. And I here removed some of the protective tape to start adding some even darker value to the top part of that background, and I'm trying to push the charcoal all the way to the edge of the eagle so that I can create a clean edge there, but I can already see that I'm going to need to use a pencil eraser to further clean up that edge and to really make my main subject stand out. And you can see now how much contrast I've achieved, so that we really have a nice sharp transition between the main subject and the background. Here the drawing is pretty much done. I'm just going to put a small signature in the lower right corner, and that was my second drawing of an eagle. Like I said, I'm going to put a link to the other one if you want to check that out as well. You can check out my other drawings of animals. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all of my videos. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.